Hey everybody, welcome back to Offshore Week here at Anglers, and joined by a very special guest today, Lenny Rudow, with Fishtalk. So we're going to talk about wreck fish fishing, bottom fishing, all offshore. So, I find that a lot of us offshore guys do this already, but there are some people that don't. We just hightail it right out to the canyons for those pelagic species, which is great, but we're running over some really good fishing spots inshore. So, wanted to bring my buddy Lenny in. We're going to talk today about tips, tactics, techniques, all the stuff that we would do to go after T-bass, flounder, spade fish, all kinds of other wreck fish that we would go after. So we hope you guys stick around and enjoy. So Lenny, welcome to Offshore Week here at Anglers.
Well, hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's good to have you. It's always good to do videos with you. It's a lot of fun. We have a good time. So we're going to talk about wreck fish fishing today. I know you do a fair amount of this. It's one of my favorite ways of fishing. I've got, obviously I fish a lot of different ways, but wreck fish fishing, there's just something about it that's just kind of simple but technical. It's a little bit of everything in one. I love it. It's great.
As the guy usually running my own boat, I particularly love it because boat handling really comes into play. Positioning the boat right over the wreck, getting the drift right next to the wreck, anchoring right on top. It really adds another dimension to captaining your own boat that counts a lot. It goes a long way in the catch.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit it spot on. Boat handling is definitely a big thing. When we go offshore, we're worried about backing down on a fish or finding those temperature breaks and all that, and heading in the right direction, make sure we're on the right ledge. But you're right. When you're bottom fishing for these kinds of species, you have to have your drifts pretty good. So understanding the current, understanding the wind, how those two are playing, against each other or with each other, that's all a pretty big factor. Getting up ahead of your structure far enough that you get a good drift over it, drifting long enough over it. Those are all major factors.
Yeah, absolutely. And I tell you, when I really came to really started getting into this type of fishing a lot was back, I want to say it was maybe the late 90s, early 2000s, when we had very tight bluefin limits, but we still had a really good bluefin bite. And of course, we still have the tight limits, not necessarily the great bite these days. But you might run out 40, 50 miles and catch a couple bluefin real fast and basically be done for the day. And it didn't make sense to head out back then, head out farther back then, because there wasn't really a yellowfin bite going on. But if you came inshore halfway and applied the boat handling, the right bait, the right tactics, A, catch a whole bunch of fish. B, you catch some of the tastiest fish around, right? I mean, you beat a black sea bass, right?
Oh yeah,
pretty tasty fish. And C, it just is a whole different dimension. It really is a fun way to fish. So, Rich, since we're talking about some diverse species here, right? And the roles different ones can play, I want to pop a surprise fish on you real quick.
Go for it. What you got?
Yeah. So this is not going to pan out every time you go fish these wrecks, but I'm telling you, if you approach the wrecks every time with this attitude, sooner or later, it will pan out, okay?
Mm-hmm.
There are actually quite a few cobia that meander around over top of these wreck sites. And particularly the sites like 8, 10, 12 miles out offshore. And every time I go wreck fishing, I always make sure I've got one heavy spinning rod, maybe 40-pound braid with a 40, 50-pound fluoro leader on like a 5500 series reel, something along those lines. And I'll have something right like this, right like that guy right there.
Oh, beautiful.
He'll be tied on the end. And when we get to the wreck sites, I make this a habit every time. When I arrive at a wreck site, before I even think about dropping the anchor, I just mill around for a little bit, drive over some of the structure. And while I'm looking to ID structure on the meter, I'm telling all my anglers aboard, keep your eyes out over the water. Look for a brown shark. If you see that brown shark, you know what that really means, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So,
and well,
Cobia's first arrive, and when you pull out, when you leave at the end of the day, do another meander around the wreck site one time. It'll lead to some good stuff.
Yeah, no, I like that surprise fish. That's definitely one to think about. Cobia has become more and more popular. I know here at Anglers, we've been selling a lot more cobia outfits. I think a lot of the anglers are fishing somewhat offshore, but they're going down to the Bay Bridge Tunnel. But you're right, you're going to find them out over top of those wrecks.
Yes. A lot of people don't think about it, don't focus on them. Once in a while, somebody sees one and you see them back at the dock and they go, yeah, we saw a cobia. And it's like, well, did you catch it? And they're like, oh, we didn't have anything ready for it. So,
Well, and I think you know all the fish you're talking about. You brought up a good point too earlier about the meat. All of these fish that we're talking about, they're great table fare. We want the tuna, we want some fresh mahi. But it's nice to fill the fish box doing these trips with other species that you can definitely eat. I mean, it's not a bad thing to have for the grill, a little assortment.
Heck yeah.
So we talked about cobia. I love those jigs. So basically, we're just using kind of a heavy jig head, heavy buck tail. We're putting some kind of soft plastic, whether it be a twister tail or it be, you could probably throw some paddle tails. Like twister tails tend to be a little more go-to. You like certain colors for cobia? What is your kind of go-to for cobia?
So my go-to is actually just what I held up. It's a where we go. There we go. It's a white skirt. We got I think that's an 1.5 ounce head right there. It might be a 2 ounce.
Okay.
And then a long twister tail. I strongly prefer the twister tail over paddle tail when I'm fishing for cobia. And I'll tell you why. It's very specific here. A lot of guys who sight fish for cobia, they've experienced this where you throw out in front of the fish and you drag it right past its nose, it just ignores it. You throw it out, you drag it, it just ignores it. A lot of times when they're up top, they just don't seem real interested in feeding. Well, if you throw out and free fall your jig, not every time, but a lot of the time, pretty surprising amount of the time, when they ignore that lure that's traveling through the water like that, if something just free falls right in front of them, all of a sudden they disappear. Next thing you know, you feel a bump on your line. So I really like the way a twister tail falls through the water as compared to a paddle tail. If I was always just fishing it horizontally, I'd be a lot less worried about it. I'd say, sure, put a paddle tail in there. But for that specific reason, to get that free fall opportunity, I always put that twister on the cobia rigs.
Okay. Yeah, I like that idea. I definitely agree with you. I think that the twister tail is a very popular selling lure for us. It's definitely one that you see on a lot of boats, on a lot of rigs that are hanging off of the boats. I definitely agree with that. And I like your color combination as well. I know a lot of people like those brighter, kind of brilliant colors. They definitely work. But I like that combination you have. So cobia, great one to bring up. Let's go deep though. Let's go down towards the bottom. Let's fish some structure on the bottom. Let's talk about one of the, you had mentioned earlier, one of the famous ones, sea bass. A lot of people that are sea bass fishing nowadays. We've talked in the past, you and I, about sea bass showing up in the bay in more numbers. But traditionally, we're gonna fish with these guys offshore. We're gonna fish for them off the beach. So, what is your go-to setup, rod and reel wise, for sea bass? Are you a spinning reel guy? Are you a conventional rod guy? What do you like?
I'm a spinner guy. I like the heavy spinning gear for this kind of fishing. I'll put on, you need a lot of weight for this, right? You got current, you got depth. You're talking, 4 ounces is minimal. You're really probably more likely talking 6-8 ounces. So you got to have a pretty heavy rod to deal with that. I like to use braid. Any kind of deep water fishing these days, you're just not going to get the sensitivity with the mono. So I like to go with the braid. And commonly, I'll use one of two things. Now, if I have inexperienced anglers aboard, number one is going to be in their hands, and that's going to be just a regular old top and bottom rig, right? Very simple. Maybe a 1/0 hook on there, maybe 2/0 is about right. I'll put on chunks of squid, chunks of clam. You send it down to the bottom, you wait for a bite, you set the hook, you reel it up. Easy, right? Pretty straightforward. One of the other things that I really like to do, and it might just be me personally, but I do find it not only effective on sea bass, but often you catch bigger sea bass. You'll get the bigger ones in the area if you drop down spoons.
Okay.
And I have a couple here that I wanted to show because this little guy right here, there we go, that spoon right there, that'll catch some sea bass, right? If you feel like it, if they're, not bite isn't great, you might want to put a little piece of squid on the hook or something. But I will never drop this on a rack for sea bass. I won't do it. And here's why. Nope, won't do it. That treble hook on the bottom, I'm going to lose that spoon, right? I'm sure you've been there, right?
Oh yeah.
This thing is going to get snagged in the wreck. I'm going to lose my spoon. So what I do is I always use spoons that are rigged like this with a couple of the swinging hooks. Get off of there. Okay, a couple of the swinging hooks up top. drop it down, and jig it like this, this will ping down on the structure and bounce right back off. Not all the time. Those hooks will still find structure sometimes, but most of the time, you're not going to get snagged. Often, we get on the camera here. There we go. Often, I will put a strip of squid on one or both of these hooks. I do think it helps to sweeten it up a little bit. And I'll just drop that down to the structure, pull it up a little bit, and just give it a real gentle little up and down, up and down. It's pretty rare that sea bass really like an aggressive jig. To me, it seems, maybe others will have different opinions, but I generally give a fairly gentle jigging motion with them. But they'll snap the spoons up. They really will. They'll snap the spoons up.
Yeah, I've definitely caught quite a few on the spoons that you're talking about. I mean, it definitely works well. I think they're a lot of fun to fish. A lot of those have that flatter profile. There's a bunch of different companies that make them. Shimano makes that flat fall, which I really like. I think that's similar to the one that you had in your hand. And the nice thing about those is they'll come when you pull them, they come up, and then when they drop, they flutter down. They have a kind of that slow flutter down, which is really nice. Slow pitch fishing has become really popular, where you have really, really soft, slow pitch style rods. It's a jigging rod. And, it's funny when we talk to the customers here in the store about it, and they pick them up and they're like, this isn't going to work. This is it's like a wet noodle. This isn't strong enough to handle the lures. And then they read the nomenclature on the rod. It says it can handle like 3, 4, 5 ounces. And it's like, there's no way. Slow pitch is designed to have that softer rod and use that faster gear ratio so that you do one revolution of a crank and it loads the rod and then springs back up. That kind of fishing has become really popular, and I think more and more people are starting to get the hang of it. But I definitely like those spoons. I'll fish with bait for wreck fish, but I'm more of a fan of using the lures. I like that interaction. I like kind of feeling what's going on. I'm going to contrast with you a little bit, though. I do like the idea of using the spinning rods because they're pretty easy to use. Personally, I'm a big fan of using a conventional. I like those round bait casters, even some of the low profile casters that are on the market. There's quite a few companies that make them now that can handle saltwater. For me personally, I just like having that spool underneath of my thumb. I like kind of feeling it, and it's a personal preference, but both would work well. I know that's definitely my preference for sea bass. It's also my preference for the next fish that we'll transition to, which is flounder. Big flounder fisherman. I love flounder fishing. And I like using that conventional because I like to feed them. Sometimes those flounder will kind of nip at your bait. So I like to kind of let a little bit of line out as I'm going along. And I think that bait caster kind of leans towards that a little bit more, personally. You can definitely do it with a spinning reel. But, so let's talk about flounder. I've kind of mentioned I like using lures. I like using the bucktail with a dropper loop up above and put a little bit of bait on top of there. What's your go-to for flounder? What do you like to do?
Well, it's funny. Inshore and in the bay, you would never see me fish for flounder with anything but a jig. I love jigging them, and it's highly effective. I have found that offshore at the reef sites and the wreck sites, I've had my butt kicked sticking with the jig. So I have transitioned over. I like a top and bottom fluke killer rig, right, with a skirt and a spinner, and I will bait that up with a gulp 4 or 5 inch swimming mullet, which is the twister tail gulp.
Oh yeah,
chartreuse, pink, white. And it's funny too because it does not look like much when you just stick the hook through the front of the gulp and you look at it and you go, no fish in its right mind is like, no, that's not going to work. But I became convinced after a couple of trips where people were out catching me left and right, and I switched over to it and caught right back up. It for whatever reason, the flounder just love it. It is highly effective out on those wrecks and reefs.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. There's always this kind of like debate between guys that are hardcore lure fishermen and guys that are hardcore bait fishermen as to which one works better. I think it's in my opinion, bait's always been very preferred if you really want to catch fish because it's real. It has the aroma. It has the taste, the feel when it gets in their mouth. But yes, absolutely, 100% agree. There's something about gulp, especially that swimming mullet, when it comes to flounder, that it will outperform anything else that you'll ever put down there. It's amazing. It really is.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. It doesn't look like it should work that good.
Right. And like you said, you look at these things, it's a twister tail. That's all it is a twister tail. This is the body of it looks like a fish. And I don't know if they really see that detail or whatever it may be. I mean, I think obviously there's a lot that could be attributed to the sense that they use. Berkeley's definitely figured that one out. I mean, it's been around for a long time. So big fan of that one. So to your point earlier, you said, you like that hook placement on your spoons up ahead. That's up on the top so they don't get hung up. That's one of the things that I really like about fishing bucktails. You kind of the hook's fixed and it rides hook point up. So if you do hit structure of some kind, whether it's rock or it's a part of a wreck, yes, it can get wedged and caught in the bottom, but the hook's not going to snag anything. So you do tend to kind of feel the bottom a little bit more and lose a little less tackle, or at least know what's going on. So I definitely agree with you on that one. I always run, like I said, that top hook, and I've found too that it's really important to do the lure on the bottom and then do a top rig. Make sure that top rig has bait on it all the time. Most of the time, for me at least, I get your opinion on this. I've noticed a much more increased catch rate with the top hook than the bottom hook. My theory is the bottom hook is usually hitting the bottom and the fish are swimming down on the bottom. And while it may be in front of their face, they're designed to look up. And so they see that stinger hook that's sitting up above them, 18 inches, 16, 18 inches up. And they'll swim up to that one before they'll hit the one in front of them sometimes. I mean, at least I don't know. How do you have any preference on that?
Well, there are definitely days when one or the other proves more effective. And I've certainly had times where the top hook is the winner. Like across the board, it's clear cut, 4-1, 5-1. What's really interesting is if you just go on YouTube and like type in underwater flounder fishing, there are some great videos that guys have shot of fishing on the drift for flounder. And it's actually pretty dang rare that you see either one of those offerings go right over a fish and a fish come up off bottom. Much more commonly, they sight it from a distance, they swim over and they swim right behind it. And they'll trail it for quite a while, sometimes several minutes at a time without hitting either one. They'll go look at the lower one, they'll come up, look at the upper one, they'll go down, they'll move around. It's really very surprising. It's not like I had always envisioned it, where you think of the flounder just sitting there, the lure goes over, it goes, oh, boom. I really didn't like that. They're moving around, they're chasing, they're looking. It's quite fascinating.
Yeah, it is. And to your point, I remember a couple of years ago, I had a buddy who had one of those underwater cameras that you put on, like in line, so you can see your bait behind it. And he did some flounder fishing up off in New Jersey, kind of the northern end of the Mid-Atlantic. And he had this video footage of a doormat flounder that was following his bait. And it was amazing how long the video was and how long the fish followed that bait for. And he would kind of nudge towards it and then kind of slow back, and he'd nudge more towards it. And he followed that bait for what seemed like forever before he actually tried to attempt to eat it. So I think that's, you want to drift over top of that structure, but maybe making a little bit extra time drifting past that structure, because you're right, they will follow them.
Yeah, and this is where we get back to the boat handling, the positioning, the planning on the current versus the wind. You've done a couple drifts, on your meter where the structure pops up. You don't, flounder fishing, I don't try and go right over a wreck or right over big structure. I try and go next it, in between two pieces, stuff like that. And this is where, trying to figure out, okay, if I stop my boat here, am I going to end up over there or over there? This is where that all becomes, I find, a real challenge, really interesting, and just adds another dimension to it yet again.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're spot on. You drift over top of a wreck, you're probably going to lose your gear. You're going to lose your lures. So yeah, finding that sweet spot, finding that right path line that you want to drift is important. Another note I mentioned, I like the bucktails that swing up or the hooks up. You like your lures, the hooks on top. There's a lot of like ball style jigs that have a swing hook. Those are really intended, just for those that don't know, those are really intended for like a soft bottom kind of thing. You don't want to fish those around a wreck. Almost guaranteed to snag on something with those, including fish, but also everything else that's down there. So we've talked about some of the popular ones. What are some other species that you like to target, or other fish that you see when you're out wreck fishing?
Well, triggerfish is a cool one.
Yeah.
Triggerfish, for those who haven't taken them home, two things to remember. The first thing is they taste phenomenal. They're not like sea bass, and they're not like flounder. They're a completely different, unique fish. Lovely taste. However, they are probably one of the most toughest fish to clean on the face of the planet. I mean, they're right up there with, like, yellow perch. Their scales are armor, and they got pokey spines. They're just difficult.
Right.
But it's worth dealing with them. It's also very difficult to catch them, and this is one you could be wreck fishing for sea bass, for flounder. There could be a bajillion triggerfish down there. They could be nibbling off your baits. You'll never know it, because they got these tiny, tiny, tiny little mouths. And you got to use a tiny, tiny, tiny little hook and offer them a tiny little piece of bait. And I'm talking like, if I want to fish for them in specific, I'll just use a regular bottom rig, right? Regular top and bottom. But it's like a spot rig. The hooks are like number 6s. I mean, tiny little things. And then you just put on a tiny little sliver of bait. Think of it like spot fishing, with the exception that you want your hooks to have a heavier leader, right?
Okay.
And if you treat it like that, it is shocking how many you can catch over a lot of these wreck and reef sites. There are actually hordes of them all over the place. Most people just never get into them, or maybe they only catch, 1 or 2 in a day, because their hooks are too big. Simple as
Right.
that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like you said, they are very good table fare. They're pretty cool looking fish too.
Yeah.
What about like spade fish? You catch a lot of spade fish while you're out there, and what's your tactics for those?
Yeah, so spade fish is a neat one. That is another one that you have to fish for very specifically, even more so than triggerfish. Again, they got the tiny little mouth, right? So you got to use a small hook. But where it really starts to get a little bit different is they'll occasionally eat a piece of squid, but it's not really what they like. Sort of the traditional classic way to catch them is to anchor right over top of the wreck and have a bucket of clams, sea clams. And you have a mesh bag. And you take a couple clams, you smash them together, and whichever one busts, you throw it in the bag. You take another clam, smash them together, whichever one busts, throw it in the bag. You get 3 or 4 busted up clams in there, put the mesh bag over the side of the boat, take another clam, and cut the foot into just tiny little thin strips, right? And then you thread one of those strips onto, again, a very small hook, a 6 of 4, something like that's about right. And you can try drifting it back behind the boat with no weight, drifting it back behind the boat with a split shot, just a tiny little bit of weight. Some guys like to put them on floats 8-10 feet below the surface and send one of them back while they drift another line back. And every now and again, smash up another clam, throw it in the mesh bag, give the mesh bag a shake. And like many other forms of fishing, when you're chumming, if you get a good, decent chum flow going and you got some spade fish under the boat, they're very likely to come up right under the boat. Most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, when you really get into spade fish good, they come right up under the boat. You look over the side of the boat and you see them. It's not at all uncommon. If you're over a wreck in, say, 50 feet of water and it's got spades on it, and you start chumming like that, you'll see them 20 feet down a lot of times, 15 feet down. You'll see them swirling around down there. And they fight like the devil.
Really?
It is hard to beat a spadefish bite because they're these, they're big, wide fish. And think of it this way. It's like a 5-pound bluegill. They do that same turning sideways thing that bluegill do.
Yeah.
Swim in a circle like that and just dig. And they will really give you one heck of a good fight. They also have a very unique taste. They're good. I'm not going to tell you that they're my favorite fish in the world, but they're tasty. And it's, again, different than most other fish. And there's something really neat about catching a fish like that, a lot of people go fishing out of OC, Virginia Beach, stuff like that, 20 years and never see one. They don't even know what they are. So it's kind of cool.
Right. So you said you use bait for those. Do you ever find using lures for those? Do you have any like small spoons or anything, or is there really not enough weight in those?
I have never tried it. I can't tell you that it'll work, and I can't tell you that it won't work. I've never heard of anybody doing it. It's with them. the traditional theory is always stick with the clam.
Okay.
Right? Use little clam strips. Now, see, now you got me thinking, Rich. The next time I try for spade fish, I want to try dropping back like maybe a sabiki.
Yeah.
Those little
Yeah.
flies.
That could definitely work.
Yeah, it'd have to have heavier leader, just so you don't break them off. But I wonder about a heavy leader sabiki. That would be really interesting experiment.
Yeah, it would definitely. Yeah, I think it's got some potential, and you can definitely tip them with, a little bit of something like we do here in the bay for, the little perch and stuff like that with the double sabikis that we use.
Yeah,
So definitely would give it a try. So I think we've covered most of the species that we wanted to talk about. It's a little bit different of a fishery, but we talked beforehand about tog. So you're going to find tog in the areas that we're talking about. They're a little more specific. They're they're their own little beast. Since we're talking about wreck fish, bottom fish fishing, I mean they are a part of that category. But yeah, you're using pretty beefy gear for these guys, because number one rule is you got to get them off the bottom as soon as possible, because they will hunker down and you just won't get them out.
Yeah, get them away from that wreckage. If
Yeah.
you can manage to set the hook in the 1/16th of a second that you have between feeling the bite and the fish swimming away.
Yeah, I've done a lot of challenging fishing in my life. I'm a fly fisherman, and I love catching all kinds of different species. Tog fishing is definitely one of the most challenging that I've heard of, and I envy anybody who's very successful at it.
Yes, they are very tough. Of course, the great thing about tog, what I love about tog, is that they give you an opportunity when there's nothing else around. I mean, you could go out there in the middle of February, right? And you can catch tog. It's not going to be easy because they're tog, but you can do it in the middle of the winter. You can do it in the fall. It's just pretty much, anytime, as long as it's legal. There's a spring closure, but as long as they're in season, if they're there, they'll bite. And boy, those fish are tight on that structure too. That's another one that I've had my butt kicked by other anglers on the boat. Been like, dang,
Yeah,
tog are tough.
So, I think you had mentioned it briefly earlier about like distance. So when we're talking about wreck fish fishing, we're not really going, like I said, we're not going out to the canyons. But like roughly how far are we going out? I mean, you don't necessarily need. I mean, this is a small boat seminar, so to speak. We're kind of gearing this towards guys who are running smaller craft. You might be watching this saying, I really want to do offshore fishing, but I don't want to run terribly far out. I don't think I can get to the canyons. I don't think I can get out that far. That's one of the beauty of these. You're not running very far, right?
No, not at all. Let me throw one thing at you. I'll throw a couple things at you. First off, being, the AT&T barge is like a mile from the Ocean City Inlet.
Yeah.
It's not going to hold a whole bunch of big giant sea bass, right? It's a mile from the inlet. But it will hold a pile of triggerfish quite often. You can run to the wreck sites 5, 6, 8 miles off and start to catch sea bass. That's where you'll find your spade fish. You'll find flounder there too. Perhaps not as many of the bigger fish as you would if you run farther. Once you get out 12, 14 miles, you're kind of in prime territory with this stuff. Sites like the African Queen wreck site, areas like that. If you run out to the farther ones, the Great Eastern wreck site is, I think, 21 miles. Then you can start to encounter, you won't necessarily catch more fish, but you do often start to encounter some bigger fish, purely because they get picked over less by fewer people. And of course, you can run way out, go to wrecks like the Olinda out by Poor Man's. And then you start to mix in with some other species too. You get your blue line tile fish in there. But one thing, let me make a recommendation, Richard. I got a good recommendation here. Hold on a minute. Let's see. I believe it's right here. Yep, I got it right here. This is as good as gold right here.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
This is my Ocean City Reef Foundation chart book. And this has the layouts of all, I'm going to do this fast so no one can copy it. It has the layouts of all the reef sites that the OC Reef Foundation has created out there. And it has GPS coordinates for them. So, I mean, it takes a lot of the guesswork out of the equation. You can get that right now. All you have to do is join the Reef Foundation and make a donation. There's a minimal amount. Don't hold me to this. I think it's $50. I could be wrong. But you make that donation, you get the chart book, A, you've got coordinates for a bazillion places out there, and B, the money that you're spending, guess what? It's going to build more reefs.
Yep.
So it's like a total win-win. So if somebody wants to get into this, they have a small boat, they're not real sure how far they want to run, they don't know exactly where to go. Every time, that's going to be my first recommendation, is join the Reef Foundation and get that chart book.
Yeah, that's an absolute, it's a great resource. You can scour, nautical charts all you want, and you might be able to pick up some of these places, but, that's going to have a ton of detail in it. And I know there's a big group of people that have put all that information together, and then the Ocean City Reef Foundation is a great one to support. Well, I think we've covered the majority of the topics that we wanted to talk about today. As we started off with, a lot of us that are, again, wanting to offshore fish, we're so concentrated on these pelagics, which is great, but don't run over these fantastic fish. You definitely want to think about adding a few of these to the box on the way in or the way out. If it's blowing really hard and it's a little rough offshore, and you're already down at the beach, you want to head out, think about hitting some of these wrecks. So make sure you have the appropriate gear on hand. We're not using the big 50 wides and whatnot for these. We're gonna be using a little bit smaller gear. But we appreciate you guys for joining. Thank you for watching for Offshore Week here at Anglers, and we look forward to seeing you guys when you guys stop into the shop. So, Lenny, thank you very much for joining, and we hope you guys have a good one.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Rich.